The American Landscape and Beliefs about the Soul. If you take a drive across the United States, from the bustling cities of the East Coast to the quiet, sprawling farmlands of the Midwest, and on through the majestic mountains of the West, you'll notice something that ties these diverse scenes together: deep-seated beliefs about what happens after death. This isn't just folklore lingering in the shadows of history, it's a living, breathing aspect of American culture. Small towns and big cities alike are peppered with churches of every denomination, from tiny white wooden buildings with peaked roofs to grand, centuries-old cathedrals. Alongside these are cemeteries, sometimes ancient and overgrown, sometimes meticulously kept, with gravestones standing as silent witnesses to generations past. It's not uncommon to pass roadside memorials, brightly festooned with flowers and photographs, marking places where loved ones met tragic ends. These markers aren't just testaments to loss but also to an enduring sense that the dead remain in some way present in the world of the living. For many Americans, belief in the soul isn't confined to religious doctrine or Sunday sermons. It surfaces in daily life through a mix of inherited traditions, media, and personal stories. Families pass down tales of visitations, an unexplained creak in the house, a familiar scent wafting through a room, or a beloved pet staring intently at an invisible guest. Some homes hang wind chimes or paint their porches blue, a nod to old Southern superstitions intended to ward off restless spirits. Certain Native American communities hold to the principle that the spirits of ancestors continue to guide their descendants, while African American folklore preserves cautionary ghost stories from the Deep South. This uniquely American medley of cultural threads finds its way into popular imagination too, from Halloween haunted house attractions to blockbuster movies about vengeful ghosts or benevolent phantoms. The idea of a soul lingering after death is never far from mind. People freely discuss near-death experiences on talk shows, recounting out-of-body sensations, and the near-universal image of the light at the end of the tunnel. Ghost hunting shows draw millions of viewers, and entire tours are dedicated to the most haunted towns, hotels, and prisons in America. But at its core, there's a quiet seriousness woven through all this play and spectacle. American funerals often blend solemn rituals with personal touches. Families might release balloons to send messages to heaven, or children might place drawings in caskets, acting on a conviction, sometimes spoken, sometimes wordless, that the boundary between life and death is not absolute. In some communities, the night after a funeral may be spent telling stories of the departed, both to preserve memory and to ease the transition of the soul. When someone dies, there's often a sense among the living that what's truly important, love, memory, identity, doesn't end, even as the body fades away. The hope, shared across faiths and philosophies, is that the soul continues on, maybe to heaven, maybe reborn, or maybe watching over the living. For Americans, death is rarely regarded as a final curtain. Instead, it's a mysterious threshold, one that sparks both fear and comfort, and which inspires stories that echo from one side of the continent to the other. Beginning the story, Bradley University, USA. It all unfurled in the heartland of Illinois at Bradley University, a small but vibrant liberal arts campus nestled in Peoria, a city where autumn paints the trees in russet and gold and the Illinois River winds quietly on the outskirts. This campus isn't as old as Harvard or Yale, but it hums with its own tapestry, echoing laughter in red brick dorms, students hurrying across quads clutching takeout coffee, the distant clang of a bell tower signaling the end of class, and, by night, a quieter, contemplative hush settling over its broad lawns. Freshman year on an American campus is always a mix of nerves and exhilaration. For 19-year-old Emily Turner, Bradley was her first leap into independence. She'd left behind the soft hills of southern Missouri for the compact bustle of Peoria, eager to prove something to herself, and to her modest, blue-collar family who had pinned so many of their hopes on her. Emily was slight, brown-haired, and carried an energy that crackled, whether she was swapping jokes with classmates or rising early to fit in a run before lectures. She dreamed of hiking the Rockies, learning Spanish fluently, maybe doing an exchange semester in Seattle. Life for Emily revolved around her classes: Intro to Psychology, American History, Environmental Science, and the part-time job she landed at Scoops and Smiles, a cheerful ice cream parlor tucked into a fading strip mall just beyond Bradley's campus. Her shifts usually started at 4 in the afternoon, and although the work was monotonous at times, topping sundaes, restocking napkins, it fed her sense of adult responsibility and helped chip away at her tuition. Her co-workers were mostly students like herself, all drawn closer during the evening lull when homework was set aside for stories and plans for the next open mic night. As October settled in, Peoria transformed. The air turned crisp, wind scattered leaves across parking lots, and darkness crept in earlier with each passing day. The camaraderie of the shop, its neon open sign buzzing against the glass, was a comfort after the world outside turned cold and still. But one by one, Emily's coworkers started dropping night shifts, busy with midterms or heading home for family emergencies. Eventually, she was the only one left closing up, sweeping checkerboard tiles under fluorescent lights before pulling her jacket tight and stepping out into the dark. Emily's walk home took her past shuttered storefronts, across a lonely four-lane road, and down a narrow, tree-shrouded block that separated the campus from the wider city. It was only about a mile and a half, but on some nights, the distance seemed to stretch further with every echo of her footsteps. She reassured herself she was safe. This was a college town after all, and she'd grown up tough. Her mother always said, "Keep your keys between your knuckles and your wits about you." Emily followed the advice, yet every time a car rolled slowly by or a branch snapped in the dusk, she felt a flicker of doubt, a tightening in her chest. There was always the option of catching the late bus that looped from the mall to the station and back to campus, but Emily, watching every cent, often decided to walk instead. It was what independent adults did, she reasoned. Sometimes she called her best friend back home during the walk, letting cheerful chatter fill the silence. Other nights, she listened to podcasts, true crime, ironically enough, or simply watched her breath form clouds as she passed beneath the faint yellow circles of streetlights. On rainy nights, puddles mirrored the streetlights, distorting her reflection as she hurried across empty intersections. The city felt like it shrank down to her in the shadows. Emily never let on to her family how uneasy she sometimes felt. She was proud. She'd made it here. She could handle a walk alone. But sometimes the path from independence to isolation was thinner than she liked to admit, and no one, not even Emily, could have seen how quickly it would all unravel on one quiet October night. Journey to the dormitory at night. Every night after her evening shift at the ice cream shop, Emily faced the long walk back to her dorm, nearly a mile and a half that felt much longer during the cold Midwest autumn. The route cut through the edge of Peoria, past the glowing windows of late-night diners, and into quiet neighborhoods where the rumble of traffic faded into the rustle of dry leaves. The city's streetlights stretched thinner the closer she got to campus, until there were only scattered pools of yellowish light and long ribbons of shadow along the sidewalk. With her bag slung across her shoulder, Emily would step out into the brisk night air, feeling both a sense of pride in her independence and an undeniable twinge of anxiety. This wasn't the busy, well-patrolled center of campus. Here, the walkways skirted abandoned storefronts, empty lots, and the kind of old, overgrown alleyways people warned you about in freshman orientation. Every so often, the silence would be cut by the distant bark of a dog or the flash of headlights sweeping around a corner before vanishing into the dark. She always made sure to keep her phone in hand, her mom's old advice echoing in her mind. Always walk with purpose. Never let anyone think you don't know exactly where you're going. So Emily kept her head up, posture straight, footsteps brisk. Sometimes she'd call a friend or her little brother to fill the silence with conversation, anything to keep her mind from darting between the shadows. On especially tense nights, she'd grip her keys tight between her knuckles, telling herself it was just a precaution. The streets grew quietest around the blocks where houses slouched behind tangled shrubbery, places where porch lights were burnt out and forgotten bicycles lay rusting against chain-link fences. On these nights it felt like the whole city was holding its breath. Occasionally she'd hear the snap of a branch overhead or catch the shimmering eyes of a stray cat beneath a parked car, making her heart leap before logic calmed her down. Still, she reminded herself, this was a college town, safe, sleepy, probably more boring than dangerous. But the final stretch before reaching her dorm was what Emily liked least. The sidewalk narrowed alongside a hedge-lined lot, and, despite the neighborhood watch sign, no houses faced the street. The path felt cut off from the world, shielded only by ancient oaks overhead and the background glow of the university bell tower. She would hurry her pace, counting steps in her head, sometimes muttering fragments of class notes just for the human sound. All the confidence she'd built during the day seemed to slip away, replaced by an urgent wish to round the corner and see the security lights of her dorm at last. Though she never voiced these feelings to her family, proud of her self-sufficiency and determined not to worry them, the truth was, each night's journey home was an exercise in courage. Even the most resilient students, as Emily would discover, can't always predict when the world's shadows might close in. The mysterious disappearance of Emily. On a chilly Thursday evening in late October, Emily followed her usual closing routine at the ice cream shop, wiping counters, updating the shift log, and exchanging perfunctory goodbyes with her dwindling list of co-workers. The Midwest night had fallen, with the wind whistling through gaps in the faded strip mall sign outside. She stepped out, pulling her striped black and white jacket closer to her body, her breath visible in the glow of the parking lot lights. Just before leaving, she'd responded to a text from her little brother, promising to call once she got back to her dorm. She hoisted her bag onto her shoulder and walked out into the darkness, letting the glass door swing shut behind her, without realizing this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. The next morning, concern rippled through multiple circles of Emily's life. Her manager at Scoops and Smiles, puzzled by her absence and unreturned texts, reached out to her emergency contact listed in the payroll folder. It didn't take long for her parents, hundreds of miles away in southern Missouri, to piece together that Emily hadn't replied to their regular late-night check-in call either. Panic grew when the dorm RA confirmed that Emily never returned that night, her bed unslept in, her side of the room untouched. What followed was a frantic, sleepless day for Emily's family and friends. When initial efforts, calls, texts, messages on social media brought no results, her parents made the 4-hour drive to Peoria. They arrived at the campus, voices trembling as they described Emily's routines to the residential staff and campus security. Soon after, an official missing person report was filed with the Peoria Police Department, kicking off a search that would grow hour by hour from campus lawns to city streets and wooded outskirts. Detectives scoured Emily's usual paths, collecting security camera footage from the strip mall, reviewing swipe records at her dorm entry, and interviewing classmates, neighbors, and her shop supervisor. Flyers with Emily's photo flooded the campus and pinned to lampposts all across town, her smile hopeful and slightly awkward, brown hair tucked in a hurried ponytail. Social media groups sprang up, with strangers volunteering to search parks, trails, and riverbanks. Yet, as hours became days, hope stretched thin. Rumors and nervous chatter spread among the Bradley student body. Classes ran as usual, but the campus atmosphere shifted. Doors were locked earlier, student groups organized safety walks, and every night walk felt heavier. The story of Emily's disappearance aired on local news, then regional, drawing hundreds of tips, but most led nowhere. Through it all, her friends replayed the last conversations, trying to recall if she had ever voiced fears or spotted anyone unusual. All anyone could do was wait and worry as Peoria's first cold snaps of November crept in, and Emily remained missing, swallowed by a darkness that now felt far larger than a city block. Body discovered in suburban area, the discovery of Emily's body was as sudden as it was devastating, casting a pall over Peoria's quiet suburban edge. It was a gray, blustery Saturday morning, more than a week after she'd gone missing, when a local hunter crossed into a tract of woods bordering the city, tracking deer along a narrow, muddy path near the Illinois River. The forest here was dense with oaks and maples, the undergrowth tangled, leaves already fallen and slick underfoot, nature's camouflage, perfect for concealing secrets that no one wanted found. The hunter's dog darted ahead, nose to the wet ground, tail whipping. Just as he was about to call the dog back, it started barking, insistent and restless, at something obscured behind a curtain of briars. Approaching with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, the hunter parted the branches and froze. The sight wasn't immediate. First, just a flash of color caught his eye. Something that didn't belong. A patterned scarf tangled around a brush, the kind a college student might wear. Goosebumps rose along his arms as the reality sank in, and trembling, he thumbed his phone to call 911, voice cracking as he managed to report a possible body in the woods. Within hours, the area was swarming with squad cars and yellow tape. Police, forensic teams, and county officers fanned out, treading carefully so as not to disturb potential evidence. News swept through Peoria like wildfire. A young woman's body had been found, and the collective hope that she might return home safe was brutally extinguished. The body, later confirmed as Emily's through dental records and personal effects, showed clear signs of violence. Investigators noted bruises, defensive wounds, and evidence suggesting she'd fought desperately in her final moments. The location where she was found was several miles from her usual route home, off the paved roads, farther than any average college kid would likely wander alone, especially at night. This fact haunted the detectives. Had she been driven here? Forced? And by whom? The news coverage was unrelenting. Reporters set up camp along the nearest crossroad, every hour bringing updates, many pure speculation. Suburban residents drove by, slowing at the sight of flashing lights, some whispering prayers, others clutching their own children tighter. For families living in the neighborhoods skirting those woods, anxiety mounted to fever pitch. It could have been any one of their daughters. Candlelight vigils were held on the Bradley campus lawn, crowds gathering in silent solidarity, faces flickering in the soft glow as a chill wind cut through the night. Behind closed doors, speculation ran rampant. Was it someone Emily knew? A stranger? Was her fate sealed by a chance encounter or something dark and premeditated? Rumors mixed with fact. Social media threads filled with theories, phone lines at the local police station jammed with calls from those hoping, despite the horror, to contribute any scrap that might help solve the case. For Emily's parents, the trip to Peoria's small morgue was shattering. No parent should ever have to identify their child like that, but they did. With whispered apologies, tears staining paperwork, hands held in a grief that felt cavernous. For the detectives, the case suddenly became their highest priority, the city's safety and sense of justice on their shoulders. The investigation has reached a dead end. The investigation into Emily's disappearance and subsequent death rapidly grew into one of the largest efforts the city of Peoria had ever seen. In the early days there was a flurry of activity, uniformed officers scouring back roads, detectives working overtime, federal agents consulting on strategy, and the press demanding updates at every turn. The campus was awash with anxiety, students glancing over their shoulders, and parents phoning the administration in near panic. Every clue felt urgent. Every hour lost a crack in the city's sense of security. As days stretched into weeks, though, the initial surge of energy began to wane, replaced by a grim fatigue. Sergeant Dave Hollis, a seasoned Peoria detective, likened the work to wading through a marsh with boots full of mud, leads dried up or fizzled out as dead ends. All of Emily's friends and co-workers cooperated, providing alibis, phone records, and hours of interviews, but their testimonies led nowhere. Dorm security footage and swipe card logs showed nothing unusual. The last sighting was the grainy mall camera video already scrutinized by a dozen sets of eyes. Students recalled nothing out of the ordinary that night, except their unease at the empty streets and brisk winds. The forensic investigation, too, was exhaustive, but ultimately inconclusive. Specialists picked through the wooded site where Emily's body had been found, marking every footprint and fiber, every cigarette butt and candy wrapper. Lab teams analyzed soil samples and scrapings from under Emily's fingernails, and even checked pollen grains for clues about where she had been in her final hours. The autopsy report painted a clear enough picture of a violent struggle, scratches, bruises, broken fingernails, but failed to provide any traceable DNA, fingerprints, or fragments that could be definitively linked to a suspect. Meanwhile, a task force of local officers, FBI profilers, and state investigators spent hundreds of hours chasing down every possible scenario. Strangers passing through town, local offenders, even known serial criminals in neighboring states. They mapped Emily's routine, retraced her path again and again, interviewed residents living near the ice cream shop and along her nightly route. Nothing broke loose. No suspicious vehicles turned up on traffic cameras, no unexplained cell phones pinged from the woods, no forensic evidence unveiled a suspect's identity. Complicating matters further was the fact that Peoria, while generally safe, did have its share of unsolved cases and a transient population. Its location along Interstate 74 made it a crossroads for people coming and going. Truckers stopping for the night, strangers blending in at cheap motels, passers-by who could leave town without ever attracting notice. Investigators consulted with detectives from nearby cities and counties, looking for any pattern or similar case, hoping for a break that might connect Emily's murder with another crime. Each time nothing fit together. The sense of frustration deepened. In the meantime, the emotional toll on the community and investigation team was immense. Emily's family stayed in Peoria for weeks, living in a hotel suite filled with donated casseroles and cards from locals. Her mother attended police briefings, clinging to every possibility, while her father walked the city at night, retracing his daughter's steps in silent, private grief. Volunteers continued to comb riverbanks, while campus vigils turned into silent marches with candles burning ever lower. The case file grew thicker, divided into tabbed sections, Witness interviews, forensics, missing property, local sex offenders. Detectives pursued the slimmest possibilities, analyzing gas station receipts, checking pawn shops for anything of Emily's, putting undercover officers on stakeouts. FBI profilers constructed psychological sketches. The perpetrator was likely male, familiar with the area, either a disturbed loner or someone skilled at hiding in plain sight. Still, every time detectives thought they might be closing in, their evidence slipped through their hands like water. Months passed, and publicity waned. One by one, agents reassigned. Faces at the nightly command post dwindled. Rumors and conjecture flourished in the vacuum of information. Social media groups argued over imagined sightings, campus message boards swirled with theories, and rogue psychics contacted Emily's parents with visions offering only more pain. At one point, a false confession submitted online wasted weeks of effort, eventually traced to a troubled teenager 3 states away doing it for attention. The real tragedy wasn't just the loss of a promising life, but the uncertainty left behind as facts faded and memories blurred by grief and fear. By the time the 1-year anniversary approached, the case was officially cold. Shelves in the Peoria police station bore sealed boxes marked with Emily's name, alongside dozens of other silent mysteries. For the lead detective, it was a personal failure that haunted his sleep, as unsolved cases tend to do. He saw her face in every missing poster and in the eyes of his own daughter, now in high school. Emily's family eventually returned to Missouri, carrying home her unopened mail, the remnants of her college ambitions, and the hope that someday, something would break the silence. Still, the legacy of her case lingered. Campus security at Bradley University was permanently upgraded. Better lighting, more patrols, a dedicated evening shuttle. Posters warning students not to walk alone stayed taped to dormitory doors through graduation. The city council allocated additional funds for investigating violent crime. And each winter, when the wind swept down the Illinois River and the days grew short, the people of Peoria remembered Emily Turner, the girl who walked home and never arrived, and the investigation that, despite the best efforts of dozens, could not quite piece together the darkness that swallowed her. The Path and its nighttime mysteries. The night was always different once you crossed a certain boundary on that long walk back to Bradley University. By day, the road felt almost mundane. Rows of tired houses with American flags flapping on front porches, a bakery that opened only on weekends, the sun shining on scrappy front lawns decorated with faded pumpkins well past Halloween. But everything changed when darkness fell. Emily knew every bump, every pothole, every stretch where the sidewalk sloped too close to the gutter. She knew the places where the street lamps were broken, and where the deep branches of old cottonwoods tangled above to create almost total darkness. The people who lived along this road were mostly absent after sunset, or at least, it felt that way. Windows glowed blue in the distance from televisions, but no one sat out on their steps, no laughter drifted across the yards, and the only sign of life might be a lone dog barking from behind a sagging fence. It wasn't just emptiness. The road had an unsettling hush. Sometimes the wind hurried leaves into little cyclones, scraping them along the pavement so they sounded like whispering voices. On other nights, a passing car would wash Emily in glaring headlights, making her squint and hurry a little faster, her shadow swinging wildly ahead of her. Even though she walked the same way nearly every night, the familiarity brought little comfort. Every shadow seemed to shift if she let her guard down. Every glint of dew on the grass could have been a pair of eyes. The mystery of that nighttime road was a local legend in its own right. Students traded stories about the old house with boarded-up windows thought to be haunted, about the supposedly deranged but invisible watcher who sent chills down freshmen' spines, about unexplained figures glimpsed in alleyways and the mysterious blue car sometimes seen idling 1 block off. Emily never put any stock in ghost stories, but she did not dismiss the creeping instincts that told her to keep moving, to keep keys ready, to never turn her back on the empty lots. Strange things, she'd learned, did not always have supernatural explanations. Every so often, her walk intersected with lingering remnants of day life, an end-of-shift convenience store worker wobbling past on a bicycle, or delivery trucks loading bread at the back of the diner. She would nod, grateful for the brief evidence that she was not entirely alone. But soon those lights faded behind her, and the darkness thickened again. Even her own footsteps seemed too loud, echoing up to the silent windows. Emily always noticed the little details. Once there were scratched initials on a street sign hidden behind overgrown ivy. Another night, a lost mitten, bright red, lay in the middle of the sidewalk, untouched for days. Occasionally she would spot a single cigarette still smoldering on the curbside, though no one was anywhere in sight. Each of these clues made her wonder what or who shared the road with her at night. Sometimes she reassured herself these were normal city relics. Other times her heart would pulse in her ears at the thought she might not be as invisible as she hoped. Inside her the ritual of walking alone at night created a strange duality, one part confidence, another part deep-seated dread. She recited class notes or song lyrics to herself, anything to keep her mind fixed on logic and routine. But as the midnight sky pressed down, even logic felt thin. Rumors about the road were fed by the smallest incidents. Last winter people whispered about how a car's brake lights had flickered and died right at the darkest bend, with the driver later reporting an overwhelming sense of being watched. Months before that, a local teenager swore he saw a woman in old-fashioned clothes appear and vanish near the abandoned bus stop, perhaps not a ghost, but enough to make him run the rest of the way home. Some students left flowers by the telephone pole where, according to campus folklore, a student had once collided with a speeding bicycle and died instantly decades ago. Even if much of it was urban legend, the psychic weight of these stories built a palpable sense of unease. Yet the mystery of the road was also in its everyday ordinariness, the harsh flickering neon of a laundromat window, the distant train horns slicing through the stillness, the automated beep-beep of a crosswalk sign echoing far too loudly for such an empty hour. The absence of crowds or busy traffic made every small movement, a curtain pulled back, a branch snapped, a cause for hyper-awareness. Everyone who walked there learned to listen to the night, to search for explanations for every unfamiliar sound. Emily, like so many others before her, experienced the strange transformation of bold daylight confidence into nighttime caution. For months, Emily avoided letting fear dominate her routine. She texted friends about funny things she saw on her walk, made up games to count the squirrels she imagined were still awake in the park, and sped up her steps only when truly spooked by an unexpected noise. But there were nights when her sense of safety would evaporate in an instant. A car slowing down behind her, a rustle in the bushes, sudden footsteps echoing that weren't her own. The line between suspicion and paranoia grew thin, and she developed the instinct of glancing over her shoulder every few minutes just to be sure. Local residents had their own ways of reckoning with the strange atmosphere. One older woman in the neighborhood kept a porch light burning all night. Not for herself, she'd told a student once, but for any kid who ever needed to get home safe. A shopkeeper hung wind chimes outside, claiming the sound repelled bad luck. Even the police, more visible on those streets after a spate of robberies the year before, warned everyone to avoid shortcuts and stick to main avenues after dark. Still, accidents and unsettling encounters kept happening just often enough to fuel anxious gossip at coffee shops and in campus Facebook groups. The geography itself seemed to conspire against those who ventured out too late. The road twisted unpredictably in places, curving around empty warehouses and unlit playgrounds. On misty nights, fog rolled in from the nearby river and draped the sidewalk, blurring shapes and swallowing the outlines of cars and mailboxes. More than once Emily's phone lost service for a block or two, a modern reminder that even connected technology couldn't pierce every shadow. But perhaps the most unsettling element was the way time seemed elastic in the darkness. What should have been a 15-minute journey stretched to half an hour as Emily became more aware of every passing second. Afterward, she sometimes struggled to recall exactly what she'd seen or heard, memories melding together, the way dreams fade in daylight. The mystery of the road became more than just its physical features or the neighborhood's lore. It became a test of courage, of attention, and of resilience. That stretch of road would remain for years to come both an ordinary route home and a locus of unresolved tension. Emily's experience, both her small victories over nightly anxiety and her eventual fate, etched the place more deeply into local legend. Students who arrived after her disappearance whispered about the haunted path behind the strip mall, some swearing they heard footsteps or saw her outline in the distance on foggy nights. Over time, small impromptu memorials appeared, a ribbon tied to a lamppost, a faded photo left on a bench, graffiti reading, "Stay safe." In the aftermath, community conversations about safety and vigilance deepened, but the road itself, with all its shadows and secrets, remained just as enigmatic. It was a paradoxical place, both utterly familiar and endlessly mysterious, shaped partly by the reality of violence and partly by the collective imagination of everyone who had ever crossed it alone after dusk. In the end, the road stood as a reminder that sometimes the most chilling mysteries are not distant or unexplainable phenomena, but rather the ones we walk through every night, hoping to make it home safe once again. Public opinion in turmoil and a strange incident. In the weeks and months that followed the discovery of Emily's body, the city of Peoria went through a transformation that rippled across every corner of daily life. The sense of security that once defined the town's quiet neighborhoods was profoundly rattled. It wasn't just the students at Bradley University who felt the aftershocks. The local residents, store owners, teachers, even those who had only ever driven past the campus, all seemed to carry a new wariness in their eyes. News of Emily's fate swirled through social media and group texts with ruthless speed, outpacing even the nightly news bulletins. Every time a parent called to warn their child not to walk alone after dark or a city council member demanded more police patrols, the city's collective anxiety ticked up another notch. The rumor mill, sometimes factual, often fantastical, churned with the intensity only possible in small-town America. In the local diners and family-run grocery stores, strangers traded stories in hushed tones over coffee, wondering aloud if the killer was still among them. "Didn't you hear," someone would whisper, "about the strange lights by the woods that night, or the camera crew who caught the crying on a live stream?" Even those who had never met Emily seemed bound together by a muted, jumpy fear. On campus, Bradley University became a different world entirely. School email alerts arrived every few days with updates about new security cameras, schedules for student safety seminars, and reminders to use the newly expanded night shuttle service. Students kept their dorm rooms locked even during the day. A sense of unity bloomed in the face of anxiety. Impromptu buddy systems formed, clubs offered to walk new students home, and the university's counseling center extended its hours. Yet this unity had a nervous edge, as if everyone was bracing for something else to happen. It didn't help that stories about odd happenings and spectral voices seemed to multiply after Emily's case went public. At the end of a local news station's live segment from the scene, several viewers claimed to have heard faint, sorrowful sobbing drifting through the audio, so clear that on playback the words, "Why only me? It hurts," seemed to echo from the dark woods. Clips circulated wildly on TikTok and Twitter, fueling debates between skeptics and believers. A handful of amateur ghost hunters arrived in Peoria, their gear bristling with sensors and cameras, eager to prove that the location was haunted. For the community, fact and speculation became increasingly difficult to separate. The ripple effects were tangible in day-to-day routines. Bars and restaurants that once stayed open until midnight or later began closing early, especially when shifts were short-handed. Dog walkers rushed home before dusk, and late-night joggers disappeared from local parks. Parents organized neighborhood watch patrols with laminated vests and walkie-talkies, pacing suburban streets long after their children had gone to bed. Houses near the edge of the woods installed extra motion lights. On some blocks, entire rows of homes coordinated to keep porch lights blazing until sunrise. The city council earmarked emergency funds to upgrade battered street lamps and add more patrol cars to the late-night rotation. For Emily's family, the line between private grief and public spectacle became impossibly blurry. News vans with satellite dishes lined the streets for days, reporters knocking gently but persistently, hoping for interviews or even just the briefest comment. Flowers, candles, and notes of farewell appeared in a growing patch outside the ice cream shop, along with posters bearing Emily's photograph and typed pleas for witnesses to come forward. When Emily's parents spoke at a candlelight vigil on the university lawn, their words were live-streamed by dozens of phones, their heartbreak shared and dissected in real time across the country. In the absence of answers, wild theories took root. Some insisted that the police were hiding crucial evidence or pointing fingers in the wrong direction. Others began to weave threads of folklore into the real events. A ghostly white figure seen darting down the bike path late at night, a mysterious battered sedan parked in the same spot for weeks before vanishing right after the murder, strange power outages that always seemed to coincide with anniversary dates of Emily's disappearance. Local message boards filled with pleas for information, hotlines for anonymous tips, and the occasional hoaxer hoping to grab the spotlight. Letters appeared in the mailboxes of city officials, unsigned except for shaky warnings about dark forces at work in Peoria. Not every story was sinister, though. In moments of fear, communities often reach for hope, and the city responded in kind. A group of high school art students painted a mural in Emily's memory, sunlight bursting through a midnight forest. Churches held interfaith services, alternating prayer and silence for her family. A local author inspired by the case and its strange undercurrents wrote a collection of Peoria ghost stories, framing Emily's memory not just as a tragedy, but as a call for greater vigilance and unity. Still, the tension was everywhere, layered into daily experience. On rainy nights, the sounds of police radios seemed to echo further across the city. Deep inside, many residents wondered if they would ever look at their familiar streets, especially the dim ones bordering the woods, the same way again. The cry heard on the live stream became its own piece of town folklore, retold at sleepovers and whispered during late walks home. People argued whether it was real or electronic interference, but those who claimed to have heard it in person insisted it felt cold and immediate, nothing like a trick of technology. In quieter moments, conversation drifted toward difficult questions. Had the tragedy changed their town forever, or was Peoria just another American city grappling with unhealed wounds and unfinished stories? Even as months passed and official updates slowed to a trickle, the sense of unsettledness persisted. Some said the heightened fear had faded, replaced by ritual caution. Others felt the air had a permanent tension, a reminder that even the safest places hold their secrets when darkness falls. Hypotheses about the murderer. In the aftermath of Emily's tragic murder, law enforcement officials, criminal profilers, and the Peoria community alike became obsessed with developing theories about the identity and motives of the killer. The absence of concrete leads or eyewitnesses gave rise to an atmosphere of uncertainty and speculation, with each group searching for patterns, psychological cues, and even coincidences that might point toward the perpetrator. At the center of the official investigation, the detectives enlisted help from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. The profiler assigned to the case, Special Agent Lisa Harper, spent countless hours poring over the available evidence, witness statements, and timelines. According to her preliminary profile, the killer was likely a white male aged between 25 and 40, intimately familiar with Peoria's landscape. Harper speculated that the offender was not a stranger to violence. Rather, he may have had a prior record of assaults or stalking, possibly escalating his crimes over time, waiting for an opportune moment when he could act without fear of interruption. This person would almost certainly have exhibited some change in behavior afterward, perhaps suddenly missing work, altering a routine, or seeming unusually agitated or withdrawn within his social circle. As news of the profile spread, several unofficial theories gained traction in the local media and among the student body. One hypothesis centered on a local transient who had been seen lurking in the area near the crime scene in the weeks leading up to Emily's disappearance. Accounts of this man varied. Some described him as harmless and mentally ill, while others insisted he had been making women uncomfortable with unwanted attention. Law enforcement, however, carefully investigated and ultimately determined he had a solid alibi for the night in question. A more disturbing theory grew from an analysis of past unsolved assaults and abductions along the same stretch of road. A handful of amateur sleuths, including students with an interest in criminology, began comparing notes in online forums, speculating that the perpetrator might be a serial offender who used the predictable routines of students walking home alone to his advantage. They mapped out similar cases, looking for a pattern in the dates, times, and victim profiles, but failed to find a clear signature linking Emily's death to a broader series. Another theory pointed to someone within Emily's own circle, perhaps a coworker at the ice cream parlor, a classmate, or a neighbor from her dormitory. Investigators underwent the painstaking process of checking and rechecking alibis, consulting phone records and surveillance footage, and even conducting background checks on dozens of acquaintances. While some in the community clung to the belief that the killer had to be someone she knew, it seemed unfathomable that such a crime could happen at random in a city like Peoria. No hard evidence ever substantiated suspicion of friends, classmates, or co-workers. Most were quickly cleared of involvement both by logistics and forensic details. Detectives also considered the possibility that Emily's killer had targeted her specifically, staking out her routine and waiting for the right opportunity. This line of inquiry led to investigations into outstanding cases of harassment or stalking, both reported and unreported. The family was asked to recall any strange phone calls, social media messages, or suspicious vehicles noticed near their home or Emily's workplace. Despite some false leads, nothing concrete surfaced. Parallel to more grounded theories, rumors shot through the local community about connections to regional crime rings. Some wondered if Emily's murder could be related to human trafficking, a theory fueled by national headlines and anxiety about the campus's proximity to major highways. Others worried that a stranger passing through, a trucker perhaps, might have committed the crime and disappeared before anyone could become a suspect. Police reviewed highway surveillance footage and contacted agencies across state lines, yet these efforts led only to dead ends. There were also voices suggesting the possibility of an opportunist, a lone wolf predator who preyed on vulnerable moments like a solo night walk. The FBI profile largely supported this view, suggesting the killer was most likely from Peoria or a neighboring town, someone who blended easily into the community, with enough local knowledge to avoid detection and pick an isolated, poorly lit area for his attack. The idea that the murderer could be someone seemingly outwardly ordinary, perhaps even a figure encountered in day-to-day life, was among the most chilling possibilities for residents. Amidst the swirl of speculation and profiler-driven suspicion, detectives remained cautious about publicizing investigative details that might compromise the case. Instead, law enforcement released a sparse but strategic series of updates to the press, reminders of the FBI composite, requests for information about suspicious individuals, and descriptions of potential witness sightings. Anonymous tip lines flooded with calls, some credible and others products of fear or wishful thinking. A composite sketch was circulated in local papers and on television, though many in law enforcement privately doubted its accuracy given the lack of a direct witness. The lack of forensic evidence, no clear DNA match, no murder weapon, few definitive tracks, added a further layer of frustration. Police analysts re-examined evidence for connections to known offenders in nearby communities, checking parole reports and sex offender registries. They considered everything from records of similar violent incidents to the presence of out-of-work laborers or those with a history of domestic abuse. A few promising suspects were interviewed and briefly detained, but each was released when no new leads could tie them to the case. Over time, armchair detectives, the amateur crime solvers in the community, began developing increasingly elaborate theories online. Some dismissed all rational explanations and claimed the case had the hallmarks of a ritualistic or cult-related crime, citing the location and the lack of direct evidence. Others pointed to folklore and lingering suspicions about the road's reputation for strangeness, and the possibility that her killer was motivated by beliefs or compulsions out of the ordinary. These stories, while dramatic, did little to move the investigation forward, but they did fuel the growing sense of danger and mystery in Peoria. In the end, despite dozens of plausible and implausible theories, no single hypothesis could be proved or definitively ruled out for years. Law enforcement continued to operate on the assumption that Emily was the victim of a crime of opportunity committed by someone familiar with the area. The rest of Peoria was left to speculate and worry that the answers and the perpetrator still walked among them. A strange turning point. The mysterious accident. 7 years after Emily's murder, as the seasons quietly turned over the city of Peoria and the edges of her memory faded for many, something unexpected rattled loose in the world of forgotten files and cold case binders. It happened in 2016, nearly by accident. The Peoria Police Department had invested off and on in reviewing unsolved crimes, and a task force officer named Janet Levin, meticulous, patient, and a believer in the value of paperwork, decided to revisit every piece of related evidence from that autumn years before. She didn't expect much. Yet as she cross-checked associated incidents within a 50-mile radius over a decade, she noticed a seemingly unrelated traffic accident tucked away in an old police database, a fatal car fire that had occurred on a desolate stretch of county road on the outskirts of town. The case file, covered in dust, described the aftermath of a grisly single-vehicle crash. The car, a battered late-model Ford Taurus, had veered off the road one rainy night, spun twice, and smashed into a dense grove of maple trees. Emergency responders had arrived to find the wreck already engulfed in flames. Inside, the bodies of 2 people had been burned beyond recognition, but later identified through dental records. Michael R., a local man with a sparse but troubling criminal record, and his elderly mother, who had rarely ventured out at night. The official ruling at the time was accidental death, presumed to have resulted from a combination of alcohol, fatigue, and poor road conditions. No one had given it much more thought. But when Levin read the full details, faint alarm bells rang in her mind. Michael R.'s name seemed familiar, a jitter at the back of her memory. She dug further, unearthing old police reports. Years earlier he'd been charged with assault against a woman but served only a short sentence after a plea deal. Since then, he'd kept a low profile, living with his mother in a weather-beaten house near the city's edge. There were rumors about his erratic behavior. Neighbors recalled occasional outbursts, late-night drives, and his habit of stalking through local bars. Strikingly, his house was less than 3 miles from where Emily's body had been discovered. Driven by curiosity and a hunch, Levin requested records from evidence storage tied to the accident. It was then that the real break came. The car itself, though mostly destroyed, had a locked glove compartment somehow surviving the worst of the fire. The original accident report listed the compartment contents: various papers, a broken cell phone, some keys, and a box of cheap plastic jewelry, presumed to belong to Michael's mother, but none had been closely examined as the crash was not then deemed suspicious. With mounting suspicion, Janet Levin arranged for the evidence box to be re-examined. Modern forensic tools, unavailable years before, allowed investigators to retrieve data from the charred remains of the phone. Incredibly, despite years of neglect, portions of its memory card survived, revealing a cache of photos, blurry, dark, but unmistakably taken in the Peoria woods. Some were generic shots of trees or trails, but one, albeit partially corrupted, captured a piece of fabric with a distinctly patterned scarf, eerily similar to the one Emily had last worn. Another image caught a store receipt time-stamped hours after Emily's disappearance, at a gas station only a few miles from the abduction site, a station Michael frequented according to financial records. Investigators obtained a warrant to search what remained of Michael's house, now abandoned, its windows boarded, but the musty interior mostly intact under layers of dust. In an upstairs closet, they found evidence the original scene of death team hadn't looked for. Tucked into a battered shoebox, hidden behind insulation, were a handful of small personal items, including a faded photo ID and a set of cheap earrings engraved with Emily's initials. There were also torn notebook pages describing nights spent driving the city's edges, cryptic sketches, obsessive phrases, and references to unfinished business and watching the woods. One item, a thin, leather-bound journal, was the most chilling of all. Though warped by water and fire, certain passages had survived. One entry, written in jagged, hurried cursive, read, "Saw her again by the yellow light, always alone, always the same path. Keep waiting till the world falls asleep." Another entry described details known only to the killer about the layout of the woods and the struggle, and ended ominously, "No one saw." As news of the discovery filtered to the investigative team, a restless impatience overtook those who'd long worked Emily's case. Detectives, old and new, pored over timelines once more, matching Michael R.'s work history, vehicle records, and cell phone signals to the night of the murder. The evidence was circumstantial but overwhelming in its coherence. Michael's known movements, converging around the strip mall, the route Emily walked, and the woods where her body was found, fit the facts in a way no previous suspect had. Further DNA analysis, using advanced techniques not possible at the time of the original investigation, was attempted on trace evidence recovered from the cubby behind Michael's closet. A partial, degraded profile at last matched markers found beneath Emily's fingernails, enough for forensic certainty. The revelation brought a storm of mixed emotion, relief, disbelief, and lingering sorrow. Emily's family was notified first, in person, and with the utmost care. There was no arrest to be made. Michael R. was long dead, his motives destined to remain unspoken. Still, the closure, however incomplete, allowed a reckoning with the years of not knowing. For the community, the truth was at once profoundly comforting and deeply unsettling, a reminder of how close evil could settle beneath the surface of the quietest suburbs, and how the smallest overlooked details could change the course of a tragedy. Shocking evidence and the truth revealed. For months, the Cold Case Task Force operated under an electrified sense of anticipation as newly unearthed evidence from Michael R.'s abandoned home began to shift the entire narrative of Emily Turner's murder. The battered remains of Michael's possessions had seemed, at first glance, nothing more than a hopeless jumble, yet each item began whispering secrets as investigators painstakingly cataloged every scrap paper, broken gadget, and overlooked trinket. The deeper they delved, the more the pieces started to fuse into a grimly coherent picture that would finally shatter years of uncertainty and rumor hanging over Peoria. It began with the Digital Forensics Lab. The melted cell phone discovered in the fire-damaged Ford had survived enough for modern technology to extract a fragment of the internal memory. It took weeks of work, but the techs finally broke through the data corruption, revealing a sequence of photos and cryptic notes. Among blurred shots of woods and eerie nighttime roadways, two images jumped out immediately. A store receipt time-stamped the very night Emily went missing, and a photo of a scarf bearing the same distinct pattern her parents remembered from that October. Both details had never been made public during the initial investigation. The time on the receipt coincided almost precisely with when Emily would have been walking home. The data put Michael R. in the immediate vicinity of the abduction opportunity. While the photo evidence mounted, detectives combed through the rest of the belongings boxed up from Michael's ruined living room and bedroom. In the sagging closet, a battered shoebox came to light, duct-taped and shoved behind insulation. Within, they found the most damning objects of all: Emily's student ID card, her favorite enamel pin, and a set of inexpensive earrings monogrammed with her initials, treasured items she'd been known to wear nearly every day. Their preservation all but confirmed that Michael had taken them as trophies, a chilling echo of his earlier crime pattern. The weight of seeing these pieces, lost for years and thought gone forever, was almost too much for the Turner family when officers showed them the evidence, prompting a storm of tears, relief, and fresh devastation all at once. But the revelation that made even the most hardened detectives shudder lay in the warped, leather-bound diary. Its pages, though fire and water damaged, retained a sporadic chronological record of Michael's movements and obsessions. Forensic handwriting analysts confirmed the match to Michael's previous writings and psychiatric files. Entries alternated between frenzied scrawl and coldly detached musings about hunting the quiet road, watching her pass under yellow lights, and repeated references to the work unfinished. Most harrowing, the diary described, in chilling, specific language, the approach near the strip mall, the means of coercing Emily off the main route, and the final desperate struggle that detectives had only ever reconstructed through circumstantial forensics. Meanwhile, the forensic team returned to DNA fragments collected from beneath Emily's fingernails and from the hidden cubby in the closet. New analytical methods allowed extraction and comparison with Michael's genetic profile obtained from legally archived records after his death. The degraded sample matched with overwhelming probability, a confirmation more final than any confession could have been. The circumstantial, physical, and digital evidence finally formed an undeniable chain, as if the truth had simply bided its time, waiting for the town and technology to catch up. News of the breakthrough was handled with utmost care. The Turner family was told first, this time in a room heavy with both expectation and dread. The lead detective spoke slowly, outlining the evidence, the timestamp, the possessions, the DNA, the confessions hidden in rambling diary entries. Emily's parents wept, not out of joy, but with the kind of shattered hope that comes from knowing yet another door had closed on the life their daughter might have lived. They finally had an answer, awful and incomplete, but a narrative they could hold against the shifting tides of speculation that had ruled their lives for so long. The aftermath in Peoria was immediate and far-reaching. Local news outlets ran detailed stories outlining how the evidence came to light, demystifying years of uncertainty and quelling, at least temporarily, the wilder conspiracy theories that had flourished in the void. At Bradley University, the student paper published editorials about closure, justice, and the enduring importance of cold case diligence, while counseling centers prepared for renewed waves of grief and relief that swept the campus. Candlelight vigils resumed, this time with an air of conclusion instead of desperation. Some townsfolk called for a commemorative plaque to mark the strange, haunted stretch of road where the ordeal began. Others simply shook their heads, incredulous that their Peoria harbored such darkness for so long, hidden in plain sight. For the law enforcement community, the final resolution was bittersweet. Veteran investigators felt both vindicated and haunted by the knowledge that one misfiled accident report had delayed justice for years. Younger officers took the case as a lesson that the smallest, most overlooked detail, an unexamined glove compartment, a half-burned phone, could mean the difference between a solved mystery and a curse left festering in silence. The case changed police procedure in Peoria permanently. Evidence retention policies were overhauled, annual cold case reviews became mandatory, and technology budgets were prioritized to ensure that no future lead would go unexamined through sheer neglect. Yet even with the facts finally laid bare, Peoria's sense of security could never fully return to what it had been before. For months after, people avoided the road after dark, and Emily's memory lingered as a cautionary shadow in every local conversation about safety, trust, and the unknown. Some said the woods felt different now, emptied of ghosts perhaps, but carrying the solemn weight of finally knowing exactly what had happened years before. Closure didn't mean forgetting. If anything, the truth made the past feel more present than silence ever could. In the end, the evidence, the scarf, the diary, the DNA, the phones and pins and painstaking records, became not just proof in a legal sense but anchors for the community's memory. By illuminating the mysteries that kept a city up at night, they allowed the living to mourn, to heal, and to walk forward from the darkness, carrying Emily's story etched into the collective heart of Peoria. Case closed and lingering echoes in the community. As the final details of Emily Turner's tragic fate emerged, an overwhelming wave of relief flooded through Peoria and the greater Bradley University community. Official statements from law enforcement confirmed that the case was closed. Justice, or something close to it, had at last been served. But closure is rarely a clean, sharp boundary. The city and campus, once frozen by fear and haunted by uncertainty, now entered a delicate phase of reckoning with all that had changed during the long years of searching, grieving, and wondering. For many, the immediate reaction was one of quiet gratitude. Candlelight vigils and memorials persisted, but their tone shifted from desperate hopefulness to somber reflection. The Turner family, whose deep pain had become a public touchstone for empathy and unity, issued a statement, relieved to finally know the truth, heartbroken that answers had arrived too late to hold their daughter again. "We are grateful for every person who never gave up hope," Emily's mother wrote, "and though nothing brings back what was lost, we know that Emily's name will stand for care, vigilance, and the unwillingness to let tragedy fade into silence." Within Bradley University, the announcement reverberated in ways both expected and surprising. Professors paused classes for open discussions about campus safety, trauma, and resilience. Counselors reported a surge in students seeking support, discovering that, despite the passage of years, unresolved anxiety and grief could resurface in unexpected ways. Some students who had only heard stories about the girl who went missing found themselves suddenly reckoning with the vulnerability that shadowed their own routines. Administrators acknowledged that the investigation had already spurred practical changes: new lighting, blue emergency posts, shuttle services, and community policing programs. Even so, there was an unspoken understanding that no structural upgrade alone could erase the collective memory of fear. For first-year students, the story had become a cautionary tale. For seniors, it was a chapter in their campus history, a reminder that safety is never guaranteed, but vigilance and solidarity matter more than ever. In Peoria's residential neighborhoods, the impact lingered in subtler but profound ways. Parents, who once had to explain the sounds of sirens or the reasons for earlier curfews, carried those conversations into new contexts, teaching their children what it meant to look out for each other, how to recognize the signs of distress, and why tragedies sometimes stretch on for years without resolution. Local businesses, some of which had shuttered earlier in the aftermath, remained vigilant. Even casual late-night strolls, which had quietly resumed in recent years, now often gave way to group walks and neighborly check-ins. The local police, for their part, underwent a kind of institutional reckoning. Investigators revisited their own actions, cataloging what had worked and where mistakes or delays had stalled justice. At roll call, older detectives reminded younger recruits of the importance of thoroughness and empathy, emphasizing the lasting consequences when a community's trust is shaken. "Every case matters," the chief reminded his team, "but the ones that stay with us are the ones that change how we see our work and one another." Meanwhile, the broader community found itself wrestling with complex emotions. Relief mingled uneasily with lingering sorrow. Local newspapers ran retrospectives. Some praised the dogged persistence of cold case officers. Others critiqued the systems that had allowed Michael R. to slip through the cracks for years. Editorials called for renewed mental health resources, domestic violence prevention programs, and ways to detect red flags before a tragedy took root. Radio call-in shows and coffee shop conversations, once saturated with fear and rumor, now brimmed with debates about resilience, forgiveness, and remembrance. The story of Emily's life and loss also left an indelible mark on local culture and lore. Annual 5K runs for women's safety bore her name. Student organizations adopted her favorite charity for fundraising drives. Artists painted murals near campus, not just to honor Emily herself, but to celebrate the courage of those who had searched, spoken up, and held fast to hope. Teachers worked her story into service learning curriculums, using it as a sensitively handled catalyst for honest talk about risk and community care. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy was a changed understanding of the nature of healing and caution. Where once the town's identity focused on its small city warmth and perceived safety, now a subtle duality emerged. Peoria could be both safe and scarred, trusting and vigilant, proud and deeply aware of life's unpredictability. Older residents sometimes remarked with a sense of awe, "In those days, nobody ever locked a door or worried when the sun went down. Everything feels different now." While not every ritual or routine proved permanent, some things inevitably returned to normal. An underlying shift in the city's character could not be denied. For the Turner family, closure did not mean an end to grief. Milestones passed. Emily's birthday, her would-be graduation, the anniversary of her disappearance, carried bittersweet weight, observed quietly among close friends and within faith communities. They became advocates for missing persons, speaking at vigils for other families still waiting for answers, transforming private sorrow into public service as best they could. In the years following, new students arrived at Bradley University, drawn by its programs and promise, yet many inevitably learned the story of Emily Turner. Some visited the tree-lined road where she used to walk home, pausing at makeshift memorials or simply reflecting under the shadow of old street lamps. Her memory lingered on message boards and in whispered warnings at orientation. To some it brought fear or anxiety. To others, a reaffirmed sense of community responsibility. It only takes one person to notice something, to look out for a friend, to make a difference. The closure of the case did not banish the mysterious, ghostly undertones that had slowly settled into Peoria's folklore. Though detectives dismissed supernatural rumors, countless students and night shift workers still claimed odd chills or strange sounds on that once notorious stretch of road. These stories became less about fear and more about honoring vigilance, a way to keep memory alive and lessons learned close at hand. Ultimately, the community's healing process defied simple definitions. While the legal chapter was at last closed, the social and emotional reverberations persisted, woven into the shared identity of Peoria and its university years after the headlines faded. Emily's story became a touchstone, not just of loss, but of how neighbors, classmates, and strangers come together in the face of darkness. It reminded everyone that justice, when it finally arrives, may not erase pain, but it can illuminate the best and strongest instincts of a resilient community, a legacy both sobering and hopeful, destined to echo for generations to come.